Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the Faith Militant Uprising in Game of Thrones. This was a major event in the show's history, and it had a huge impact on the course of the story. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, I know what you're thinking. Game of Thrones? That's a show for old people. But hear me out. Game of Thrones is not just for old people. It's for anyone who loves drama, intrigue, and violence. And if you're into that sort of thing, then you're going to love the Faith Militant Uprising. So what is the Faith Militant Uprising? Well, it's basically a religious war. The Faith Militant is a group of religious zealots who are determined to restore the faith to its former glory. And they're not afraid to use violence to achieve their goals. The Faith Militant Uprising is a fascinating and complex story. It's full of drama, intrigue, and violence. And it's a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. So if you're looking for a show that's full of action, adventure, and excitement, then you need to check out Game of Thrones. And if you're a fan of the show, then you definitely need to watch the Faith Militant Uprising. But be warned. The Faith Militant Uprising is not for the faint of heart. It's violent, it's bloody, and it's full of nudity. But if you can handle it, then you're in for a treat. What is the Faith Militant? The Faith Militant is a religious order that worships the seven gods. They are led by the High Sparrow, a charismatic and powerful man who is determined to restore the faith to its former glory. The Faith Militant has a long and complicated history, but in recent years, they have become increasingly powerful and influential. The Faith Militant is basically a group of religious zealots who are not afraid to use violence to achieve their goals. They are the equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition, but with a Westerosi twist. The Faith Militant are a force to be reckoned with. They are well-trained and well-armed, and they are not afraid to use their weapons. They have been known to arrest and imprison anyone who they deem to be a sinner, including members of the nobility and even the king's own mother. The Faith Militant are a controversial group. Some people believe that they are a necessary evil, while others believe that they are a threat to the peace and stability of the Seven Kingdoms. Only time will tell what the future holds for the Faith Militant. But one thing is for sure, they are a fascinating and complex group, and they are a major part of the history of Game of Thrones. If you're a fan of the show, then you definitely need to learn more about the Faith Militant. Why did the Faith Militant rise up? There are a lot of reasons why the Faith Militant rose up. But here are the top 5 reasons, as told by a 16 to 24-year-old. 1. They were tired of the corruption of the nobility. The Faith Militant saw the nobility as being corrupt and immoral. They were living lavish lifestyles while the common people suffered. The Faith Militant wanted to bring back the days when the nobility was humble and pious. 2. They were afraid of the growing power of the Targaryen dynasty. The Targaryens were a non-religious family, and they were seen as a threat to the faith. The Faith Militant wanted to make sure that the Targaryens never became too powerful. 3. They were looking for a way to restore the faith to its former glory. The faith had been declining in power for centuries, and the Faith Militant wanted to reverse that trend. They wanted to make the faith the dominant force in the Seven Kingdoms once again. 4. They were bored. Let's be honest, being a religious order can be pretty boring. The Faith Militant wanted some excitement in their lives, and what better way to do that than to start a rebellion? 5. They were drunk. Let's be honest, the Faith Militant are a bunch of drunks. They love to drink and party, and what better way to do that than to start a rebellion? So there you have it. The top 5 reasons why the Faith Militant rose up. It's a fascinating and complex story, and it's one that is full of drama, intrigue, and violence. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, then you definitely need to learn more about the Faith Militant Uprising. How did the Faith Militant Uprising unfold? The Faith Militant Uprising unfolded in a series of events that were both dramatic and violent. It all started when the High Sparrow, the leader of the Faith Militant, led his followers on a march to King's Landing. The High Sparrow demanded that the King Tommen Baratheon, give the Faith Militant more power. Tommen was initially reluctant to give in to the Faith's demands, but he eventually relented. He allowed the Faith Militant to set up their own headquarters in the city, and he gave them the authority to arrest and imprison anyone who they deemed to be a sinner. The Faith Militant quickly began to abuse their power. They arrested and imprisoned anyone who they didn't like, including members of the nobility and even the king's own mother. They also began to enforce their own brand of justice, which was often harsh and cruel. The Faith Militants' actions quickly alienated the nobility and the common people. The nobility saw the Faith Militant as a threat to their power, and the common people saw the Faith Militant as a bunch of religious zealots who were abusing their power. The Faith Militants' power eventually came to an end when Cersei Lannister, the Queen Mother, used her own brand of ruthlessness to defeat them. Cersei had the High Sparrow and many of his followers executed, and she disbanded the Faith Militant. The Faith Militant Uprising was a major event in the history of Game of Thrones. It had a profound impact on the course of the story, and it left a lasting legacy on the Seven Kingdoms. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, then you definitely need to learn more about the Faith Militant Uprising. It's a fascinating and complex story, and it's one that is full of drama, intrigue, and violence. What were the consequences of the Faith Militant Uprising? The Faith Militant Uprising had a number of consequences, both positive and negative. On the positive side, the Faith Militant Uprising helped to restore the power of the Faith of the Seven in the Seven Kingdoms. The Faith had been declining in power for centuries, and the Faith Militant Uprising helped to reverse that trend. The Faith Militant also helped to improve the lives of the common people by enforcing laws against prostitution, gambling, and other vices. On the negative side, the Faith Militant Uprising led to a great deal of violence and bloodshed. The Faith Militant were not afraid to use force to achieve their goals, and they often resorted to torture and execution. This violence created a climate of fear and intimidation, and it made it difficult for people to live their lives in peace. The Faith Militant Uprising also led to a great deal of religious conflict. The Faith Militant were determined to restore the faith to its former glory, and they were willing to use violence to achieve their goals. This led to a clash between the faith and the other religions of the Seven Kingdoms, such as the Old Gods and the Drowned God. Overall, the Faith Militant Uprising was a complex event with both positive and negative consequences. It is a story that is full of drama, intrigue, and violence, and it is a story that will continue to be debated for years to come. What was the outcome of the Faith Militant Uprising? The outcome of the Faith Militant Uprising was a mixed bag. On the one hand, the Faith Militant were able to achieve some of their goals, such as restoring the power of the Faith of the Seven in the Seven Kingdoms. They also helped to improve the lives of the common people by enforcing laws against prostitution, gambling, and other vices. On the other hand, the Faith Militant Uprising also led to a great deal of violence and bloodshed. The Faith Militant were not afraid to use force to achieve their goals, and they often resorted to torture and execution. This violence created a climate of fear and intimidation, and it made it difficult for people to live their lives in peace. The Faith Militant Uprising also led to a great deal of religious conflict. The Faith Militant were determined to restore the faith to its former glory, and they were willing to use violence to achieve their goals. This led to a clash between the faith and the other religions of the Seven Kingdoms, such as the Old Gods and the Drowned God. Overall, the Faith Militant Uprising was a complex event with both positive and negative consequences. It is a story that is full of drama, intrigue, and violence, and it is a story that will continue to be debated for years to come. Conclusion. The Faith Militant Uprising was a complex event with both positive and negative consequences. It is a story that is full of drama, intrigue, and violence, and it is a story that will continue to be debated for years to come. The Faith Militant Uprising was a major event in the history of Game of Thrones. It had a profound impact on the course of the story, and it left a lasting legacy on the Seven Kingdoms. If you're a fan of the show, I encourage you to learn more about the Faith Militant Uprising. It's a fascinating and complex story that is full of drama, intrigue, and violence.
If you liked the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll stay here until next time.